Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopidana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopidana Vallabha Girivardhari Asuranandana Asuranandana Yamuna Tera Yamuna Tera Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopidana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopidana Vallabha Girivardhari Asuranandana Asuranandana Yamuna Tera Vanachari Yamuna Tera Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Gopidana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopidana Vallabha Girivardhari Asuranandana Asuranandana Yamuna Tera Vanachari Yamuna Tera Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Jaya Prabhu Paradaya, Prabhu Paradaya, Prabhu Paradaya, Prabhu Paradaya. Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Srimad ki jai, Swami Govind ki jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Go Pramanandi. Always some of the Vedis, always some of the Vedis, always Shigo and Shigo. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 8, Manifestation of Brahma from Vishnu, text number 7. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Praktam Kalatad Bhagavatamena Nivrittidama Viratayatena Sanat Kamaraya Sachahapista Sankhayana Yanga Vitaya Praktam Kalatad Bhagavatamena Nivrittidama Viratayatena Sanat Kamaraya Sachahapista Sankhayana Yanga Vitaya Praktam Kalatad Bhagavatamena Nivrittidama Viratayatena Sanat Kamaraya Sachahapista Sankhya Yananga Vitaya Word for word, Praktam was said, Kila, certainly, Etat, this, Bhagavatamena, by Lord Sankarshan, Nivriti, renunciation, Dharma Abhirataya, unto one who has taken this religious vow. Tena, by him, Sanat Kamaraya, unto Sanat Kamara. Saha, he, cha, also, aha, said, Prastaha, when inquired of, Sankhayanaya, unto the great sage Sankhayana, Anga, my dear Vidura, Jitavitaya, unto one who has taken such a great vow. Translation, Prabhupada Sesi Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki. Translation: Lord Sankarshan thus spoke the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam to the great sage Sanat Kumara, who had already taken the vow of renunciation. Sanat Kumara also, in his turn, when inquired from Sankayana Muni, explained Srimad Bhagavatam as he had heard it from Sankarshan. Purport: this is the way of the Parampara system. Although Sanat Kumara, the well-known great saintly Kumara, was in the perfect stage of life, still he heard the message of Srimad Bhagavatam from Lord Sankarshan. Similarly, when he was questioned by Sankayana Rishi, he spoke to him the same message he had heard from the Lord Sankarshan. In other words, unless one hears from the proper authority, one cannot become a preacher. In devotional service, therefore, 2 items out of the 9, namely hearing and chanting, are most important. Without hearing nicely, one cannot preach the message of Vedic knowledge. I'm just going to read text 8. There's no purport, and basically it's in the same vein of the story we're hearing. So text 8, the great sage Sankayana was the chief amongst the transcendentalists, and when he was describing the glories of the Lord in terms of Srimad Bhagavatam, it so happened that my spiritual master Parashara and Brihaspati both heard him. Excuse me, coughing. I'll survive though. So this is one reason why we hear that Lord Balaram, sometimes Lord Nityananda, is the Adi Guru, or the original Guru. So Sankarshan, of course, is an expansion of Lord Balaram. And so here we are hearing that he's, in a sense, beginning a disciplic succession, parampara. That the 4 Kumaras have inquired from Sankarshan, and he has spoken to them the message of Bhagavatam, and then the message in turn is spoken by the 4 Kumaras, headed by Sanat Kumara, to Sankayana Muni, and he himself explained it to Parashara Muni and Brihaspati, and on the message goes. So, of course, the 4 Kumaras, for those who aren't familiar, they appear as very young boys. They're actually very old, pure devotees. They were born, they're considered sons of Lord Brahma, and Lord Brahma, as the original universal progenitor, or of his role to populate the universe. So the 4 Kumaras were manifested for that reason, but they declined the order of their father, and they just wanted to stay as renounced sages. And they considered, if we stay in the bodies of very young boys, then we're not going to be affected by, lust or sex desire, because generally, young boys, young children don't have that issue until much later. So even though they're pure ancient sages, they remain as young boys. And actually, this is the reason why, because Lord Brahma, that the 4 Kumaras as his sons, they declined his order to populate the universe. He became very angry, extremely angry, Lord Brahma. And because of that anger, out of his forehead manifested Lord Shiva. Yeah. So, we hear the story of Durvasa Muni. He's a partial expansion of Shiva, and he's known to get very angry very easily. So he's taken on that sort of rasa of anger a little bit. So, but here we're hearing about great personalities, great sages, pure devotees. So they're qualified to receive the message and pass it on. I'm sure we've all, as when we were school kids or whatever, we played that game Chinese Whispers. So you have a big line or a big circle of people, and somebody whispers a message into the person's next to them ear, and they pass that message on, and when it comes back, the message is completely different. So, imperfect hearing like that. So, but we don't hear that here. And of course, it's interesting that this is going on even before Srila Vyasadeva. Generally, we say that, well, the Bhagavatam was first spoken by Srila Vyasadeva. So he spoke it. Thank you. He spoke Bhagavatam to Ganesh, who was actually writing it down. So it was understood that at that time, just near the beginning of Kali Yuga, that this ability that previous people in previous ages is just oral reception. It's like you hear once and then you remember. Very strong memories. But in Kali Yuga, that ability has sort of more or less disappeared, and we have to write everything down. If we don't write it down, just immediately it's gone from our head. So Srila Vyasadeva, understanding that as the literary incarnation, he had the Bhagavatam put down, but it's not that the first time that Bhagavatam was actually spoken. And even to say that Srimad Bhagavatam is a book, sometimes we've been challenged like that by people that, well, you're talking about scripture, it's just a book, it's just written by people. As if to say that because people are imperfect, therefore the book's imperfect. But Srimad Bhagavatam isn't simply a book. Srimad Bhagavatam is eternal sound vibration. At a certain point in time, it was put down in writing by Vyasadeva and Ganesh, but we shouldn't think it's simply a book. It's eternal sound vibration. And the beginning of every creation, the complete Vedas are introduced into the human society for our benefit. So the parampara system is very, very important, that it needs to be properly maintained. And we hear that in Bhagavad Gita that Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, and he explains that many millions of years before I explained this knowledge to the sun god. But over time, the message and the disciplic line has been broken. So therefore it was established again. Krishna was speaking again to Arjuna to re-establish that parampara system. From a more scientific academic point of view, the historians say if a certain body of knowledge isn't passed down for more than 3 generations, that knowledge gets lost. And it's interesting that, for those who know the history, the end of the Roman Empire, just a few generations up, because they constructed, the big sort of palaces and buildings, and, it was very active in construction. But just a few generations later, at the beginning of what's called the Dark Ages, people would see these big houses, big mansions, big palaces, and say, oh, giants used to live there. The history and that knowledge and that whole culture was lost very quickly. And it wasn't until, around about the 14th, 15th century when the Renaissance began. Renaissance means like re-beginning, re-establishing or rebirth. That a lot of that lost Roman technology and knowledge and etc. started to be, rediscovered again. So this is the thing with parampara, the parampara system, that ideally it should always be passed on and protected by qualified persons, so that for so many generations to come, we can get that benefit. And of course, Prabhupada would sometimes be glorified by his godbrothers and others that you've done something amazing. You've written all these books, etc. And Prabhupada said, if I've done anything amazing, it's simply that I've just repeated what I've heard from my Guru Maharaj. And so that's the essence and the spirit of disciplic succession, that you're simply repeating what you've heard from higher authority, and you're not changing anything. As soon as you start changing something, then the essence of the message can be lost. Right from the very beginning, when Prabhupada began his missionary activities around the world, he was warning his new disciples that you shouldn't listen to anybody else, even my own godbrothers. If they say one word different, you'll become confused. So every acharya has their own mood and mission. And so for us, our founder acharya is Srila Prabhupada. So what he's given to us in our books, that's his mood and mission. It's not that he's changed anything from the previous acharyas when he was translating these books. He had the tikas, which is like volumes of the Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, written by many of the previous acharyas. And so he was reading what they had to say, and then he would write his own purport. So he wasn't changing anything, but he was giving the knowledge according to the modern time. So it was relevant for us. So that's the the greatness of Srila Prabhupada, that he was able to give us the eternal Vedic knowledge at a time, in a way, in a mood and style that we could understand. And he did say that in the future, particularly talking about the Chaitanya Charitamrita, but in his books in general, that in the future, people will write purports to my purports. And that's already going on. Different devotees are writing their own books based on Srila Prabhupada's purports. So it always has to be current and understandable for the, one big criticism like Islam has, that I'm sure it's not the whole religion, but certain groups, they seem to be stuck in sometimes talk about the 6th or 7th century, that they haven't gone forward, that what was current and valid and acceptable way back then, they're still trying to push, at the same time at the present moment. So in the corporate world, the popular mantra is that you either innovate or perish. Unless you keep up with the competition and you're very innovative in presenting your product to your consumers, then you're just going to fall by the wayside. So similarly with spiritual knowledge, it has to be relevant. We're not talking about changing the eternal principles, but to make it relevant to our audience, so they're able to understand, and that it is relevant to their life. Otherwise they can hear so much deep philosophy and they think, well, what's that got to do with me? Or how do I use that? So it has to be relevant to your audience, otherwise it gets lost. So in this these two verses, we're hearing from the 4 Kumaras. They inquired from Sankarshan, and the Sanat Kumaras, or the 4 Kumaras headed by Sanat Kumara, spoke to Sankarayana Muni. He spoke to Parashara and Brihaspati. So it was interesting. Parashara is the spiritual master of Maitreya Muni, and he's the one who's actually speaking these verses. So he's explaining how his spiritual master heard the message of Bhagavatam, and obviously Maitreya Muni heard it from his Guru Maharaj, Parashara Muni, and now Vidura is hearing from Maitreya Muni. So in this way, it's an unbroken message passed down from person to person. So, sure it's a verse you're familiar with, Bhagavad Gita 4.2. That evam parampara praptam imam rajashaya vidu sa kalenheya mahata yoganasta parantapa. That Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, saying this supreme science, was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. So extremely vital that remember there was one devotee, Sahotra Maharaj. He sort of left his body now some years ago, but he was a very active preacher in the US, particularly in the early days. He was on Prabhupada's library party where they would devotees travel around the US selling sets of books to libraries and particularly universities. So Sahotra Maharaj, he told me once that he was speaking to a professor at, might have been Harvard, but one prominent university in the US. And I think the professor was an Indologist or something similar. Anyway, Sahotra Maharaj had the books and he was trying to sell him the set. And anyway, the professor was quite interested, and he said, yeah, I have great respect for the Vedic culture. And he asked Sahotra Maharaj, so how is it that the message has just been going on for so long, for thousands and thousands of years, and it seems to be unchanged? How was that happening? And Sahotra Maharaj, because he was, because he was brahmachari back then, he was reasonably new devotee. He said something, but he wasn't sure exactly how to answer. So later, when he had a chance to speak to Prabhupada, he just spoke of the discussion, and Prabhupada said, yes, disciplic succession, parampara, this is the reason why Vedic culture is still intact, and the knowledge and the message is still intact, that has been passed down through that unbroken chain. So Ikshvaku Prabhu gave the class yesterday. For some reason, I was preparing for that text 6, thinking that's what I was speaking on. But one thing Ikshvaku Prabhu didn't mention was that in the purport yesterday, Prabhupada mentions that something about even a small boy hearing. I can find it. Yeah, there are many instances in which even a small boy who was a great devotee of the Lord could offer excellent prayers. So Ikshvaku Prabhu didn't mention that, but this is Dhruva Maharaj. So I thought I'd just comment on that since it wasn't touched on yesterday. So that's Dhruva Maharaj. He was a young boy. He was insulted by his stepmother, and to get revenge perhaps, he vowed to go to the forest to find God, because he had that desire. He wanted a kingdom greater than his own father or grandfather. And anyway, it's a long story, but Dhruva Maharaj, he performed extremely austerities, extremely austere activities, meditating and barely breathing and not eating. But even after just a few months, a form of Vishnu, I think it was Prishnigarbha form of Vishnu appeared before him to offer benediction. So pleased with even this young boy, he was performing these great austerities. Of course, before Vishnu appeared, Narada Muni actually was concerned about Dhruva Maharaj and suggested that in the jungle it's a dangerous place, you shouldn't be here. But Dhruva Maharaj says, I am the son of a Kshatriya. I've been insulted. How can I go back? Like that. So he was very determined. So then Narada Muni gave him the mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So that was the mantra that Dhruva Maharaj was chanting. So anyway, the point that Prabhupada's bringing up, that even a young boy can offer fully absorbed in affection, offer nice prayers. So when, just from text 4, this is actually Maitreya speaking also. We'll hear from the next canto, Canto 4, Chapter 9, starting from text 3. It's sort of paraphrasing, but when Dhruva Maharaj saw his Lord just in front of him, he was greatly agitated and offered him obeisances and respect. He fell flat before him like a rod and became absorbed in love of Godhead. Although Dhruva Maharaj was a small boy, he wanted to offer prayers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead in suitable language, but because he was inexperienced, he could not adjust himself immediately. Out of his causeless mercy, the Supreme Personality of Godhead touched his conch shell to the forehead of Dhruva Maharaj. So you can imagine a young boy, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself appears before you. You're not just going to start up a casual conversation, completely overawed. And he just couldn't speak. He was speechless in that awe and reverence. But when Lord Vishnu touched him with a conch shell, it imparted knowledge unto him. He was able to speak. So at that time, Dhruva Maharaj became perfectly aware of the Vedic conclusion and understood the absolute truth in his relationship with all living entities, and he offered his deliberate and conclusive prayers. So there's many verses following the prayers of Dhruva Maharaj. So the point here is that we need to receive knowledge from higher authority, that we can't just make something up. So Dhruva Maharaj got the special mercy, but any disciple who accepts, anybody who accepts a bona fide spiritual master, it means they're authorised to speak knowledge based on the disciplic succession. So this point that we're simply not, when devotees come together, automatically there's going to be Krishna Katha, ideally, talking about Krishna. So we should avoid this, what's sometimes called Gram Katha, or just village talk, just gossiping, village talk. So it's something that Prabhupada was very critical of his disciples, that they just like to gossip. And there was actually, back in might have been the early 70s, that, it was the LA temple, San Francisco temple, might even been Boston, I can't remember. But anyway, they installed a telex machine. So for those digital natives who just used to their phone, so before the phone was fax machines, and before the fax machine was telex machine. So it was just messages were sent along telephone lines. And so Prabhupada was showed this. I think it was the centre of the office of the BBT, and Prabhupada was shown this telex machine, and Prabhupada wasn't very impressed with it. What's the use of all these new machines? Anyway, one devotee said, Prabhupada, we can connect all the temples together. And Prabhupada just wasn't impressed. He said, what's the use? You'll simply gossip. And so we can see that's what's going on. Everybody's gossiping on their devices. And Prabhupada said, if you want to read something, read my books. So that was his conclusive statement. So because Prabhupada does use the word prajalpa sometimes, that another word for Gram Katha, just gossiping. There was an interesting class Govinda Maharaj gave years ago, and he was speaking on this point of prajalpa, saying that actually prajalpa is only for actually very elevated persons, and the classic example is Radharani. And when Uddhava comes to see Radharani and the gopis bringing a message from Krishna, and Radharani is just that ecstasy of separation from Krishna, and she's in her madness of ecstasy, she's a little bee, and she's thinking that bee is actually a messenger from Krishna. So she starts talking to that bee as if, had actually come from Krishna. So what she was saying is considered by Rupa Goswami as prajalpa. It's very high spiritual crazy talk, is perhaps a rough English translation. But Govinda Maharaj, there's actually 10 different types of jalpa, and prajalpa is one of them, but Prabhupada does say that there's no English equivalent of most of these words. It's such a high sort of spiritual understanding that to get an English translation doesn't really do it justice. But Govinda Maharaj, he concludes with that class that we shouldn't be so proud to think that our village talk is actually prajalpa. So, as I said, even though Prabhupada used that word, but nevertheless, we shouldn't think that our village talk is on the level of Radharani. So, also in that yesterday's verse, the word Uttama Shloka was used. That when the four Kumaras are speaking to the sage Sankhayana Muni, it's considered they were addressing Uttama Shloka. Uttama means topmost, Shloka means verses. So it's a name of Krishna, one who can be praised with the topmost verses or elegant verses. So it's one name of Krishna, meaning that that Uttama Shloka can only be Krishna. And when the devotees come together and they're speaking, their realizations and glorifying Krishna. So at that point, Krishna can be known as Uttama Shloka, that he's been glorified with elegant verses. Just on a side point, yesterday was the return Rath, like Jagannath Puri. If you're aware, they had the Rath Yatra from the main temple to Kandicha, and then 7 or 8 days later, the Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra come back on their cart back to the main temple. So that's actually called Bahuda Yatra, that return Yatra. So the main Jagannath temple is considered to represent Dwarka, and Kandicha temple represents Vrindavan. So taking Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra on the cart from one temple to Kandicha is in the mood of the gopis, the Brajabashis, trying to bring Krishna from Dwarka, back to Vrindavan. So yesterday that was the Bahuda Yatra, and it's not as big as the main Yatra, but still there's a lot of people there to take darshan of Jagannath as he passes. So along that way, I think it was a Grand Road? Yeah, Grand Road, huge, very long road. Sort of normally when there's no festival, it's full up with markets and all sorts of things, but on that day everything is cleared and it's a very, very wide road, and millions of people are there watching Jagannath. So on their way back, they stop. There's a Mosima temple where, of course, there are different stops, but that particular one is quite famous. And Jagannath, Baladev, Subhadra, they offered all sorts of sweets that are made at that temple, made from coconut, rice, jaggery, and lentils. That's just part of the ritual of the return Rath. So this wasn't mentioned yesterday, but perhaps we'll end there. If there's any questions or comments, yes, sir. Just take the mic. Yeah, you just have to press a button again. Is it coming on?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for your class. Wonderful. Thank you for speaking to us. You mentioned earlier that the Srimad Bhagavatam is eternal sound vibration. And can you explain this a little further? What about the Srimad Bhagavatam is eternal?
Well, the Bhagavatam is basically a summary study of all the Vedas. It's like every part of Bhagavatam comes from the original Vedas. And so the Vedic scripture as a whole it's eternal sound vibration, eternal knowledge, the beginning of every creation. it's introduced into the universe for the benefit of human society. So there's no point where the Vedas doesn't exist. It's always existing, whether in written form or in sound form. So it's always available for those who have that connection to the disciplic succession. So that's the understanding, that Bhagavatam is a summary study of the Vedas, and the Vedas are eternal sound vibration. Therefore, the message of Bhagavatam is also eternal in that same way. Yeah, you go first.
Thank you so much, Manibandha Prabhu, for the wonderful class. Just speaking to that point about gossip, Upendra Prabhu was Prabhupada's servant for quite some time. Really wonderful devotee, but quite a chatty fellow. And he was chatting, gossiping outside Prabhupada's room to one of the devotees in terms of, okay, what's going on there, what's happening in this temple, just chatting. And then Prabhupada called him and said, "Stop gossiping."
Yeah, no, I've heard that. So indirectly, I referenced that. I just didn't want to mention his name, but yeah. I think at one point, whether it was that point or some other point, but Prabhupada said this gossip will destroy everything. Some reference like that. So he wasn't impressed with that gossiping. Yes, sir.
You were saying how Prabhupada, because he's an Acharya, is able to present Vedic knowledge in a way we can understand. And I was thinking it's interesting that I read, Prabhupada said that Sukadev's particular quality and greatness was that he could present the Bhagavatam so it was attractive to all different men. That was his quality. Interesting.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Yeah, so you need to be aware of your audience, so that it doesn't go over their head, I mean, when you're speaking to a mixed audience, it can be a little bit difficult that, the more senior devotees might think it's a bit basic, the younger devotees, it's over their head, but somehow or other, you need to make it relevant so that they can understand and benefit. There's something they can take away from what you have to say. Yes.
Just on that point, I remember I met the devotees through an outreach program in Sydney, and the first program I ever went to, Kadamba Swami was there, and he gave a lecture about Jagat Bharat, and I listened to it. I have absolutely no idea what was going on, right? It's like a deer and then going to a temple, and I was very confused, but I remember the taste of it was so nice, and even though it didn't make sense at the time, now I look back on it, I can remember what he said. And also I remember that was like such a pivotal point in my devotional service. Just hearing from a pure devotee like that was such an impactful thing. So it's like even when it does go over new people's heads, you know that it's making some kind of impact.
No, it's a nice realisation. No, in the very early days, the new people, they couldn't understand Prabhupada's accent. But one devotee, he became a devotee later, said, I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I knew it was very important. So he just, and even Prabhupada himself, listening to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he'd say, some things I couldn't understand, but I just stayed and listened. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati said he marked him. He likes to listen. So it's the hearing. The sound vibration enters in the ear and it purifies the heart, even if there's no or limited external understanding. Yes, Prabhu.
Krishna says in the last part of the Bhagavad Gita, I'm not sure exactly how the verse goes, but this message should not be preached to those who are not austere or those who are faithless. But then when we go out in book distribution, we're preaching to people who practically have no faith, they have no austerity, they have no respect, most of them, for Vedic literature. So it seems contradictory. You want to shed some light there?
Well, this is the mood of Lord Nityananda. You know, there's no limit to how much mercy there is. You offer it to everybody, you know, not everybody's going to accept, but, you know, so we take on the mood, the preacher takes on the mood of Lord Nityananda, that you present it to everybody. But we see that Lord Chaitanya, he wasn't speaking deep philosophy in public, it was just kirtan. It was just the deep philosophy was just for his intimate associates, you know. But, in the Harinam Chintamani, Lord Chaitanya discussion with Haridas Thakur, Lord Chaitanya, he asked, so how are these, faithless persons, I think he was also talking about the non-human living entities, how will they be delivered? And Haridas Thakur said, by the loud chanting of Harinam, everyone will be delivered. So, you know, if they can't hear the philosophical message, you can give Harinam and Prasad. So, and I think Prabhupada, when he came to Australia, there's a letter that he sent to the Melbourne Temple that he could understand Australians weren't so philosophically inclined, but you will deliver Australia through mass prasadam distribution. So, so we can see in Australia, Food for Life program, you know, is very vigorous, very robust. Okay, thank you very much. Prabhupada ki jai.